Are you guys looking for one of the best darkroom projectors out right now? I know I was, and I think I found it in the Nexigo Aurora Pro MK2. So this is not a sponsored review. Nexigo did send this product free for the purpose of this review, but I'm able to say whatever I want about this product, and they didn't tell me what to say. So as far as specs go, this puts out 2400 lumens. This is using the latest ALPD 5.0 laser engine. It does 4K HDR plus and Dolby Vision. They claim a 4000 to 1 native contrast ratio and a 30,000 to 1 dynamic contrast ratio. The reason they can achieve that is because they're laser dimming and their dynamic iris, which I'll talk about later. This does have 3D capability, a 4.2 millisecond latency for gamers, and they claim that it can cover up to 107% of the BT 2020 color space. So up until December 5th of 2025, they're still running a sale where it's $2,999 for the projector and the 100-inch Fresnel screen. They also include 3D glasses. I also checked and it does have free shipping, so pretty crazy deal. The idea of having a projector in the bedroom was because I previously had a 55-inch OLED, which had awesome black levels, but I think it was a little bit small from a distance of about 16 feet away where we normally watch from the bed. So as far as immersion, the OLED had perfect black levels, but because of the size, I would probably give it like a 6.5 out of 10. With the Nexigo and the 100-inch screen, I would say that the black levels, even though they're not perfect, they're still very good. And the 100-inch screen gives it an immersion of about a 9 out of 10. So just to give you an idea, the 100-inch screen is nearly 4 times the size of the 55-inch. So is it overkill for this bedroom? Heck yeah. Do I love it? Heck yeah. So before we get into the projector itself, we have to talk about screens. I initially had a 100-inch plain white screen and it was fine in the dark, but once you turn the lights on, it really washed out the image. But this 100-inch Fresnel screen from Nexigo is next level for darkroom viewing and with the lights on. This is a 1.5 gain screen, which helps because this projector is 2400 lumen, which isn't the brightest that I've seen, but still plenty bright enough. But for me, in this particular situation where I might be watching while my wife is sleeping, I don't need the brightest projector just lighting up the entire room. What I really care about is the black level. And surprisingly, and maybe it shouldn't be surprised because this is a gray screen, is that the Nexigo screen did improve the perceived black level. And those were already awesome to begin with, but they're even better now. So on this particular screen, I don't see any laser speckle. Typically with a Fresnel screen, the viewing angles aren't great, but I don't see any issues with that, especially because we're mostly viewing from the front anyway, so I'm not viewing from the side. Now, I'm not gonna lie, this wasn't the easiest screen to put together. It wasn't the hardest either, but it did take some time.
If it weren't for music, this would suck a lot more.
But I will say that this is probably one of the most solid screens that I've ever reviewed, ever tested. It has a ton of reinforcements and there is no twisting or bending when it comes to the screen, which is important because with an ultra short throw, you really do notice little ripples in the screen. But this screen is very taut. And you can adjust these things here after it's been mounted and it'll adjust the left and right side up or down to get that perfect alignment. And after you're done, you remove the bars. It has adhesive so it doesn't move unnecessarily. So back to the projector itself, the out-of-box colors are some of the best that I've seen. I typically use Dolby Vision Dark or Bright, and just the colors are shocking. So to compare that to other projectors, I've previously reviewed BenQ projectors that are factory calibrated out of the box. And if that was a 10 out of 10, this would receive a 9.5 out of 10. So it's very close. I'm also reviewing the Valerian Max, which should be out pretty soon. And that one I would say is about an 8 out of 10. So as far as sharpness, this is plenty sharp, especially in the center. If I were to look at the corner sharpness, it's pretty good as well. No, most ultra short throw projectors are just not as sharp as a typical long throw projector. So if the max is a 10 out of 10 for center and corner sharpness, I would say that this is 9.5 out of 10 for center and an 8 out of 10 for corner sharpness. Now, the reason I was specifically interested in this projector is their SAE Scene Adapt engine. What that is just a way for them to increase the contrast ratio, improve the black levels. So one way they do that is from laser dimming, which this and other projectors do. Specifically, the Valerian Max does have laser dimming, but this does have something that the Valerian Max and many others don't have, which is actual dynamic iris. On the Max, you can set the iris manually, but on this, it's done automatically. So the combination of the laser dimming and the dynamic iris has shown me that you can get really awesome contrast on an ultra short throw projector now. So the best thing I can say about SAE is that it works. Now I know some people will wonder if you can see artifacts of it, dimming, the laser dimming, the iris opening. And if I were to look hard and use some torture tests, I definitely can see that happening. But in normal viewing, I never thought to myself like, oh man, this is taking me out of the picture because it's dimming or brightening up, and nothing like that. It's easy enough to turn that option on or off, or to change the settings. So I've messed with the different settings, and I usually keep them up pretty high, and I've been impressed with the results. Now, on my old BenQ V7050i ultra short throw, it was one of the first laser projectors that had an option for laser dimming, and it just looked really bad. You can really see the laser ramping up and dimming down, and it was just very bad, and I keep it off on that particular projector. So as far as black levels, I would say if an OLED is perfect, 10 out of 10, this would get 9 out of 10. My old BenQ V7050i, I would say maybe a 6 out of 10, and the Valerian Max is much better. I would say an 8.5 out of 10. Now for dynamic tone mapping, I use the famous scene from Goblet of Fire, and all I could say is I could see the faces. And that's one of the tests to see if you could actually see the faces. The dynamic tone mapping worked well on the scene, as well as some of the tortured tests from some of the Spears and Munsell test discs. I tried it with some 10,000 nit content, and it did a good job of mapping it down to a range that the projector could reproduce. So if I compare the dynamic tone mapping, I don't have a MAD VR or anything like that, but I do have some products that have the VS10 engine, and I have TVs and other projectors that have dynamic tone mapping as well. And I could say that this is just as good as any of those. So 10 out of 10. And here's something I don't hear a lot of people talking about is what is the user experience like? What is it like to live with something like this? And the things I look for is how fast is it to turn on and off? How fast is it to switch from Dolby Vision to HDR to SDR? And because there's always an HDMI handshake, how long does that process take? I think a lot of that has to do with the processor speed. So I could say that this is pretty good. The Valerian Max is actually the fastest to turn on and off, almost TV-like, nearly instant. This one has a boot up screen, so that does take a while. HDMI handshake isn't the fastest, but it's not the slowest, so somewhere in between. If a TV is 10 out of 10, the Max would be like a 9.5 out of 10, and I would say this is maybe a 7.5 out of 10 when it comes to switching speed. The one thing I did notice or didn't notice about this was that the fan was quiet, much quieter than the old BenQ that I had been testing out here prior. Another thing to note is that the remote is backlit, so that's handy. There is no built-in streaming on this, but to me it didn't really matter because I use an Apple TV, and I would recommend that somebody use a better streaming device anyway. Apple TV does have an option to output everything in Dolby Vision, whether it be SDR or HDR, so I prefer that because it keeps everything in Dolby Vision, so there's less of that switching that I talked about earlier. I did test the speakers briefly, but honestly, I'm not using those speakers. I have it connected to a WIM amp and these Larson 4.3s. The only time I heard it was when I turned it on initially. I heard the boot up sound, which is pretty obnoxious, and I went and turned that off immediately. So overall user experience of having this in the bedroom, real world situation, how fast is it to switch, heat, dissipation, noise, all that. If I were to rate it, I would say that the Max would be like a 9.5 out of 10, maybe even a 10 out of 10. So the old BenQ projector, I would say maybe a 4 out of 10, just because it was painfully slow and pretty loud and it put out some heat. The OLED screen, I would say 9.5, maybe 10 out of 10, because it was just fast to turn on and off, didn't really put out a lot of heat. So that leaves the Nexigo, and I would give it an 8 out of 10 just because it's pretty fast, not the fastest, and the heat and noise is relatively low. So overall, despite this not being a perfect projector, I think this is the closest thing that I've seen to a perfect projector in this particular room for this particular situation. Darkroom environment. I don't have to mount anything to the ceiling. I just have it mounted here in the front. Pretty simple setup. Other than having to make the screen, I would say the mounting and all that is just as easy as mounting a TV. The black levels are seriously impressive. I tried to capture that and I could barely see my hand in the video and actually in person also.
Wow, that's really hard to see.
As far as black levels, I think it is superior to the Valerian Max, which is already very impressive for a DLP projector. Nexigo does offer Fresnel screens up to 120 inch. I would recommend that if you could fit that. I also think that this would work in a brighter room if you did have one of those Fresnel screens. Without it, you may want a brighter projector. So as far as value proposition, this is not an inexpensive product. But for $2,999, and right now they're including the screen and some 3D glasses, I would say pretty good. Pretty good for the price compared to other things that you can get in this price range. So for value, I would rate this a 9 out of 10. So that's my review of the Nexigo Aurora Pro MK2. If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, ring the bell to be notified when I upload new videos, and like these other videos that are similar. Thanks for watching.